Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us here. It is 7 p.m. on February 18th here in Toronto. Um, you may be watching the recording, in which case, welcome from the future to the past. Thanks again for joining us. We're here for our Scholarships Canada Finding and Applying for Scholarships webinar. I guess we can get started. I will share my screen in just a moment and should be able to see the presentation. Lovely. And I'll just keep an eye on the lobby as well. And please do use the Q&A, and we'll take some questions at the end. And I'll just add that here as well. At the end. Great. And post. So we will dive in. We have about an hour. We'll tackle as many sort of questions at the end as we can. We'll try to admit people as they filter in as well. So without further ado, let's dive right in, finding and applying for scholarships. Quick intro to who we are. Scholarships Canada is the big one, but we have a handful of student-facing websites like School Finder, which is for domestic students, Canadians looking for the right college or university. We also have Study in Canada, which is the inverse for international students who are looking to join us here in Canada. And we have fairly newly studyandgoabroad.com, which is for studies abroad. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little later. But first, about me. My name is Logan. Thanks for joining us. Quick sketch about my background. I have a lot of post-secondary experience. After high school, I did a gap year, pursued some personal projects, and then I went to Niagara College, Canada, for an advanced technical diploma, very fancy sounding, and I worked as a video editor for several years. But I wanted to make my living with words. I wanted the capital U university experience, and so I did some time abroad, volunteering overseas for about half a year, teaching English. And then I came back to Canada and enrolled at the University of Toronto, where I achieved an honors BA in linguistics. And I did it in maybe not record time, but pretty quickly by taking extra courses, summer courses, because I wanted to get it done as quickly as I could. So here we are now, having graduated from U of T, from Niagara College, and now I'm working for Scholarships Canada as the editor, chatting with lovely folks like yourselves. So that's a little bit about me. Suffice to say, I do know a thing or two or three about tuition fees. So quick stat check here. This is via our friends at Statistics Canada. Value of a post-secondary education. So this is data from a few years ago. The trend is more or less consistent. We won't belabor the point, but the basic idea is that the more highly educated you are, the more likely you are to earn more money over the course of your career. So if you graduate with just a high school diploma, you will, rule of thumb wise, on average, earn less money than somebody who goes to school, earns a diploma, degree, or master's and beyond. For what it's worth, I did the diploma at Niagara College, was 3 years, and then another 3 and change at U of T to finish my 4-year degree there in about 3 years. Okay, and fun fact, over the course of your career, 30 plus years, you might be expected to earn maybe $1 million more, but lifestyle inflation, odds are pretty good that you will end up spending more. So keep that in mind. Okay, but it is more than just money. There is a sort of conscientiousness quality and a community engagement element where folks who go to higher ed typically are more civically engaged, perhaps have healthier habits, better environmental consciousness. Now, there is a chicken and egg question here as to whether post-secondary instills these qualities in students who come. Or does post-secondary self-select for students who typically exhibit some of these qualities? Probably a little bit of both. But the basic idea is that we think a lot about job skills, training for the future. What am I going to do after I graduate? Super important topics, obviously, but school, in theory, ideally, should be a place to explore ideas and prepare yourself to engage fully with your community, right? Okay, so some important terms. We will get into the meat of the matter once we've defined a couple of key items here, scholarship being the most important, maybe. We use it as a kind of general catch-all term, Scholarships Canada. We might refer to scholarships in general. Very specifically, a scholarship is related to grades or accomplishments. So, you get 95% average in your high school career, and University of Toronto might give you an entrance scholarship based on those grades. That's great. We also use scholarship kind of more generally just to mean like money for school. It may be renewable. Keep an eye out for that. We'll talk about it in a second. Bursary is kind of the inverse of a scholarship. A bursary is not based on grades or accomplishment. It is based on financial need. So if you have a gap in your financing, and realistically, who doesn't? Chances are you are in financial need. Some bursaries may be renewable, others may not. Keep an eye. Okay, award. Again, we use this as fairly a generic term, X number of awards from a given school. But very specifically, an award is for achievement, sometimes academic, often extracurricular. So you might, get the philosophy award because you wrote an incredible paper on Kant or something. Awards typically are not renewable. They might be like a one-time, hey, good on you, kid, kind of deal. And then finally, for our purposes here, a grant. A grant is a one-time support, typically not renewable, and often grants are at the grad level. So if you're doing some research for your graduate degree, your master's program, you might need a grant so that you can get out to Manitoba to collect some soil samples, for example. Generally not renewable, but you may be able to, apply for and receive another grant. Okay. Before we move on, I just want to cover renewable, quote unquote. So a lot of these are renewable. What that means is a given award that is renewable, will continue to fund you multiple years as long as you continue to qualify. So a lot of entrance awards are renewable. We'll cover those in a bit. What that means is you come in first year, say, they give you an entrance award because you got an 80 plus. And then in your second year of university, you're doing great. You're keeping your grades up. You still have an 80 plus in uni. And the good folks there at the financial aid office bring you in and say, yes, we will renew your scholarship. And so they'll pay you again. So renewable scholarship is something you really want to keep an eye out for. Not all awards will be renewable, of course, but if you can find one, that's a good idea to apply and certainly keep your eye on the eligibility requirements so that you can continue to receive the fund. Okay. How are you going to pay for school? So most students end up with a mix and match of all of the above, but here are the highlights for most people. Savings and work, obviously, this is quite contextual. You have to be in a position where you have a part-time job and you can save some cash. It's not all in the door and out the door. Family and parents is more or less the same. You need to be in a position where your folks can save some money for you, and they need to like you enough to share it with you. So for some folks, this is easy, bank of mom and dad, quote unquote, right? Other folks don't have that luxury, and so we'll have to kind of go it alone a little bit more. Thus, loans. Loans come into the picture for a lot of students in a lot of different ways. The most common, of course, being the student loan. Here in Ontario, it is OSAP, the Ontario Student Assistance Program. They used to know it as the Ontario Stereo Acquisition Program back in the day when people knew what a stereo was. Basically, a student loan will be more forgivable in terms of repayment. So if you get OSAP and they give you a $10,000 loan, you may in the end only have to repay $5,000 or $6,000, say, hypothetically. Of course, loans also come from banks. There are student lines of credit. Those are pretty popular, and it's a sort of middle ground between a student loan and a true like bank loan. Student line of credit will have more forgiving terms than like a mortgage, for example, but you will still need to pay it back. For international students, there are other loan options as well, but those are the main ones. Student loans and line of credit. So we can talk more about that later if needed. And then finally, scholarships and bursaries. So that's what we're here to talk about. The beauty of a scholarship or a bursary is that it is money you do not need to pay back. Unlike a loan, unlike perhaps a float from the bank of mom and dad, there's no debt to it. Scholarships, bursaries, that money comes to you and it stays with you, at least until you use it to pay for tuition, etc. But no need to pay it back. Okay. So you might have looked at Scholarships Canada already and thought, you know what, a lot of these awards seem pretty low, like 7 or 8 grand for tuition in an engineering program in a single year, plus residence and books and whatever. Suddenly $1,000 doesn't seem all that meaningful. But on the other hand, think about how many hours you would have to work at a part-time job to earn that $1,000. It is more than you might think. And in any case, there's lots of accoutrements, sort of ancillary costs attendant to post-secondary, like textbooks, like your Metro Pass if you attend in person, phone bill, entertainment, etc. Having a little bit of that extra cash can be helpful. But it's worth noting too that a lot of scholarship admins prefer to send the money directly to the school. So in a rare case, you might get the cash directly. Some admins do that where they'll mail you a check or equivalent. Other admins might send the funds directly to the school to credit your tuition account or etc. So whether you literally get your hands on the money or not sort of depends really on the scholarship. Okay. I want to cover a handful of scholarship myths, misconceptions, to disabuse yourself of some of these, and ideally put yourself into the frame of mind where, you know what, receiving a scholarship actually may not be as difficult as you might fear. First myth, I don't have the marks. Well, it's a classic one. You might be thinking, oh, I didn't graduate as valedictorian, or, I'm not on that road. But surprisingly, maybe, most of the awards that we index on Scholarships Canada are not interested in your academic average. They are interested in other factors, which we will discuss a little later, foreshadowing. Second myth, lots of competition. This is a yes and no kind of thing. There is some truth to it, but you might be surprised to learn that a lot of admins, more than half that we talked to, actually want more applications, and a small handful actually end up with no apps at all. So you could conceivably, right time, right place, end up winning by default, just by virtue of having been the person who applied when many others did not. Now, Scholarships Canada has a little meter, I'll show it off a little later, showing essentially activity, popularity of a given award. Some will be very high, others will be low. You may not be surprised to learn that the awards that typically get fewer applications are smaller value and perhaps more obscure. There are certainly strange awards out there that might only be for a few $100, or they might want something odd. One of the most famous that I always think of is the duct tape stuck at prom contest, and it's an annual scholarship for I guess 2 students to create their prom dress out of duct tape. And you get 10 grand if you win. So there's some weird ones out there. There's some small ones that often don't get enough apps. So basically what I encourage you to do is to try not to turn your nose up at some of the smaller value awards. If a given scholarship listing speaks to you for whatever reason, typically it's better to apply than not, because you'd never know. Okay, myth 3, only schools give scholarships. Definitely not true. In our DB, we've got over 10,000 awards that are indexed from non-educational admins. These are, companies, unions, religious organizations, community groups, etc. Excuse me. I was just updating today. It's called the Max Scholars, and it's the Muslim Awards of Excellence. They open just today and close at the end of March. And this is a huge scholarship program from this community organization to support Muslim students. So there's lots of organizations just like that are out there. It's not only your UBC, your U of T, your McGill's that give scholarships, but of course, the school that you attend is one of the best places to start. Okay. Myth 4 of 5, we're chewing through it. Scholarship deadlines only in the spring. Definitely not true. There are sort of peaks and valleys throughout the year. We do see a spike sort of April time. We also see a spike in October. And we're starting to see admins moving towards the summer as well, with, I suppose, the expectation that summer students have more time, perhaps because they're not in school. Now, whether they are attendant to scholarship apps and is another question, but yeah, the basic point is that it's kind of peaks and valleys all through the year. You don't want to feel like I've applied for college or university and I've applied for scholarships today and now I am done. Well, it'd be nice if that was true, but it's not true. There are deadlines all throughout the year. Finally, myth 5, I'm not in financial need. Well, only about a third of the awards that we index ask about financial need. These are bursaries, typically. But most people probably do have a gap. Now, how financial need is assessed really does depend on the admin. Some administrators will look at your OSAP eligibility, like they might want to see that you have been accepted for OSAP. They might want to see how much OSAP has said you are getting. They may just ask you if you're in financial need, yes or no, and take it from you on your word. So you never know. Most awards are not financial need based. A lot of them are, and a lot of folks are in financial need anyway. So here is a quick recap. And the last one is the most important in some ways. You can't win if you don't apply. So that is true, obviously. But it is the same logic that the casino uses, right? You can't win if you don't play. So when you're thinking about planning for your scholarship journey, you're digging through, you're thinking about time, just remember that there is an element of risk, really, because you are setting your time aside ahead in hopes, expectation of being rewarded later, which contrasts pretty cleanly with a part-time job, where, for example, you go to work, you work your 6-hour shift, and you go home and you can be pretty sure that you're going to be paid for those 6 hours. If you apply for a scholarship and it takes you an hour, you are not necessarily going to be recompensed for that hour's worth of work. So yes, there is you have to apply to have a chance, but that time is not necessarily going to pay off the same way it does for a part-time job. Now, how to make your time work for you, we will talk about in a moment. But I want to drill down on this message too. It is sort of ambitious. It is our ethos, our motto. And I think a lot of students, well, a lot of people really, humans, we have a tendency to sort of self-talk, and our self-talk can be very convincing. So if you are accustomed to thinking of yourself as not worthy of a scholarship, or I don't have the grades, or I don't have the extracurriculars, or, I'm not the student council president or whatever, and thus I am not eligible and it's not worth applying. Well, that sort of self-talk can be very self-defeating. And, we can carry these attitudes with us beyond the classroom, right? I'm thinking this is broader, more life philosophy kind of stuff. I would just urge you to try to reframe and think of yourself as somebody who is worthy and deserving. And that can help not only your scholarship search, but your whole life, maybe, hopefully. Okay. So before we dive too much more deeply, I want to take a quick tour through a handful of awards that are of interest for various reasons, just to give you a taste of the different kind of stuff that is out there. So first one here, this is a grad level award. I know we have some master's level students here. This one specifically for going to the USA, which may or may not be a four-letter word these days. But the Fulbright Awards are fantastic and have been for a really long time. They pay in USD too, which is great. If you're looking at grad studies, research-based graduate studies, and you are considering the USA, Fulbright is super cool. Okay, number two, Gene Lund Foundation. This one's pretty cool too. These have been going on for many years. There's about a dozen awards of $1,000 each available to Canadian citizens or permanent residents who are of Chinese descent. So Jean Lum was a Chinese Canadian woman, awarded the Order of Canada. And so her family has made this trust, this foundation, to support students. New for this year, they've actually added some awards for current undergrads as well. So if you're into athletics and you're already in university, or going into family medicine, there are awards for those folks as well. Excuse me. Pretty cool, Gene Lund. Okay, major entrance awards. I wanted to highlight this because, well, for several reasons. One of which is that they are closing very soon on Thursday. Ontario Tech University is a school fairly local to here in Toronto. And I wanted to pull this out because it shows entrance scholarships, which are typically for students who are coming right out of high school. This one's for Canadian citizens and permanent residents. They've got various levels of the award, depending on your academics, your leadership, and your community involvement. Those three factors are pretty major, and we'll come back to them again. And this award is renewable, which is, again, fantastic. So you get the first award, they might give you a $9,000 in the first year. You keep your grades up. Second year, they give you another $9,000. Really can't beat it. So yeah, if you're considering a technical university, Ontario Tech's pretty sweet. Pretty great entrance award program, and it does close very soon. Okay. Number four, the Jake White's Memorial Scholarship. I always like this. It's a small award of $1,000 for Canadian high school students, and it's specifically for automotive services, heavy duty mechanic, that kind of like trade and transport adjacent kind of award. I highlight this because we don't see all that many. It's starting to change now, but the classic sort of scholarship is the 95% plus to go to U of T for a Bachelor of Science degree, right? This is not that. This is more working with your hands kind of focused. Pretty cool. You can create a short video on why you should be chosen, which is optional, kind of amazing. And it's closing soon. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, Jake White's Memorial Scholarship, super cool. We'll cover two more examples. The Rashida Abdullah Scholarship for Aspiring Women Teachers. I mentioned the Max Scholars earlier in our session. So this one is on my mind because they just opened today. The deadline's actually March 31, not April 1, so I'll have to fix that. In any case, it's for a female Muslim student who is going into education studies in the fall. And finally, the Horatio Alger Association of Canada. These ones are for grade 11 students, which is kind of unusual. Grade 11s who are starting university next year. There's college version, there is a trade school version, a couple different versions. They're for students who are in what they call critical financial need. And they do actually define that as, I think, a household income of about $70,000 or so. They're looking for students involved in the community or extracurriculars and who have decent grades of about a 70% average. And it's like a $10,000 award. Like I say, there are sub-variants of this. There's an entrepreneurial one that's worth like $25,000. So Horatio Alger, super cool. Lots of good stuff that they have to offer. Okay, so that was a quick tour of just a handful of semi-random awards from the DB to give you a sense of what sort of awards exist. So where do you start? We've already covered a couple of factors. These are some of the most important ones, and there's the second slide as well. These are kind of, sort of, more or less in order of precedence, sort of. Field of study obviously is a huge one. This is the program that you're interested in or currently studying. We saw the Jake White's Award, which was for automotive, heavy-duty mechanic, that kind of thing, very specific field of study. By contrast, we also saw Gene Lum or Ontario Tech, which are field of study agnostic, right? Doesn't matter what you're studying, so long as you meet some other criteria. So it really does depend. Rule of thumb wise, there seems to be more support for STEM fields. So your sciences, your mathematics, your computer sciences, as opposed to stuff like business and poetry, for example. Not to say they are not out there, but we are in a period of STEM ascendancy right now, it seems. Your study is a big factor too. We talk about entrance awards. That's for students who come right out of high school. So we looked at the Ontario Tech entrance awards. Obviously, first, second, third, fourth, it's all pretty straightforward. Though I will say I have observed that typically awards become more challenging to find the deeper into your career that you get, your school career. That is to say, if you are in third, fourth year, you may have a harder time finding awards than if you're entering into your first year. It's not fair or good, but that's just sort of what I've observed. All the more reason to keep an eye out for those renewable scholarships early in your career so that they will continue paying you year in, year out. Okay. Activities. This is a big one here in Canada, and it's big in the States as well for kind of different reasons. So in the US, we often think about, I'm going to Penn State on the football scholarship, right? I get a full ride because I'm playing quarterback. We don't have so much of that here in Canada. There's a much smaller university college sports program. There's less money to be made in, student sports, and thus there is proportionately less funding. It's not to say there is none, but it is, less of that sort of full ride stuff. Here in Canada, we are often focused on what I call the big three, and these are leadership, community involvement, and volunteer experience. Now, these are all sort of three prongs of the same fork, really. And it's not to say they need to be separate things. You don't need to be student council president to demonstrate leadership skills. You need to be somebody who shows up, who is seen to be taking ownership of their learning, maybe trying to support the people around you. Really, scholarship admins are looking for students who aren't just going to be a bump on a log, but who are going to give back, who are going to engage, right? It goes back to that early slide where we talked about communityism. That's kind of what we're looking for. Academic average, obviously straightforward. Better grades are better. There's really no way around that. Grades are not the be all end all, but they are not nothing either. So if you're in a position where you can shore up your grades, I would advise you to do so as best you can. Other factors. Heritage. Already we looked at the Gene Lum Awards for students of Chinese descent. Here in Canada, we see a lot of support for Indigenous folks, First Nations, Métis, Inuit, etc. Obviously, there's a long history of historic injustice there that scholarships are one very tiny part of moving towards truth and reconciliation. But it doesn't stop there, obviously. I've seen awards for Polish folks from Norway and other Scandinavian countries. There's lots of little community foundations out there. Another big one is the BBPA, the Black Business Professionals Association. Max Scholars I talked about earlier for folks who are Muslim. Okay, affiliation. This is the companies, groups that are around you. A little bit hard to define, so I like to use a personal anecdote here. When I was going into college after high school, I was working at a No Frills, stocking shelves, part-time job. And that No Frills was a Loblaws company. Well, Loblaws offered scholarships to their employees, and it was a union job, and the union actually offered scholarships to members as well. So that was two vectors right there just from my part-time job. At the time as well, my dad was working for Coca-Cola Canada, who offered scholarships to kids of employees. And his gig was union also. And so the union offered scholarships. So just from my part-time job and my dad's full-time job, at the time, I had four different scholarship opportunities just based on the companies and unions that were in my life at the time. That's not to say this will be the case for you, but do keep an eye out. For example, my apartment building here in Toronto, the property management company offers a scholarship to somebody who lives in the building, I think it's worth $1,000 a year or something. So pretty cool. Just keep an eye out. If the companies around you do not offer scholarships, maybe you could politely ask them why. They may never have thought about it. And maybe they will take that polite inquiry under advisement and set up a scholarship program of their very own that perhaps they would consider you for. You never know. But the squeaky wheel does get the grease. Okay, personal circumstances. This is indelible stuff about you that maybe you couldn't or wouldn't change if you could. Stuff like being a member of the queer community, disability, amputee, maybe you're a parent, a mature student, whatever else. These are just sort of specific things about your background, who you are. Financial need, we've covered this already quite a bit. Pertains to your income, typically factors in your household income, which might mean your parents as well, depending on your living situation. If you live alone, then it won't factor that in, typically. And location, finally. This one's a little bit of almost miscellaneous, but where you live and where you go to school are both important. Some awards will specifically require you to be studying at a particular school. Some might require a particular province or country or whatever. Some awards might only be for students from a particular place. So the Gene Lum Foundation Awards are a good example. They have a whole bunch of awards for Chinese Canadians, and one of those whole bunch is specifically for a student from BC. So there's lots of awards, and one of them is for a student from BC. So done and dusted, you're either from BC or you're not, fine. There's lots of variants like that. So do think not only about where you are from, but where you're going to live when you go to school. Okay. Featured scholarships. So this is probably the fastest way to find new awards. This is stuff like, well, it is scholarships, of course. I've covered a few of them already in the session. There's also stuff like surveys and diary opportunities and whatever. It's like different ways to get cash that are not necessarily scholarships. A bit of a mix. New stuff floating in there all the time, so it doesn't hurt to check it out. But we also have this tech to, quote, get matched, which is algorithmic-based scholarship recommendations, essentially. We are looking at the tech behind this right now. Obviously, we are in an AI boom at present, and we're trying to figure out how can we leverage this new tech to make the matching better. So in short, stay tuned for the results. But the current tech does work. The way it works is sort of like social media, really. You fill out a profile. It asks you a ton of questions about factors like field of study, activities, personal circumstance, location, and etc. And essentially spits out a list of awards that may or may not match you for whatever reason. So maybe you are interested in equestrianism, so you get matched with an award related to horses. You never know. It helps go from many, many thousands of results and many, many pages of scholarship listings down to maybe a few dozen results and a couple of pages. They won't necessarily all fit perfectly, right? But it does give you a place to start. to begin winnowing down your results and getting a sense of what might be out there and what you might still want to be looking for. You'll also be asked about subscriptions. There are quite a few options, but well, there's maybe two that I would urge you. The most important, of course, is going to be scholarship deadline alerts. These are a monthly reminder email, essentially that just says, hey, we noticed X, Y, and Z match for you for whatever reason, and you may want to check them out because the deadline is coming up pretty soon. So it's typically awards that are closing in the next 30, 40 days. Those deadline alerts are great because they can help you keep on top of awards if you're not frequently coming back to the site and remind you before something is too late. There's also the newsletter. There's several versions of the news, and of course, myself and a colleague build the newsletter every week, and so we'd love for you to subscribe to that as well. But when in doubt, do jump in the deadline alert. Matching scholarships, we kind of talked about that already. You can also search and refine. This is pretty straightforward stuff. If you've ever used Amazon, you'll have a pretty good sense of this. Browse by categories. This is something that's fairly new the last year or so. Essentially, we're just trying to make it easier to sort the results. There are so many scholarships out there that it can be quite overwhelming sometimes. So this helps you just dig through based on specific categories and characteristics, as it were. Okay, I want to cover some general tips, and then we'll get into more specific advice. Getting motivated, have to be willing to put in the time. And the next one, a few hours per week. That's probably a little bit aggressive, maybe really in peak time if you have the free time and you're really dedicated. But putting in a couple hours per month is probably not a bad idea. And the scholarship deadline alert can help remind you that it's time to check in. Keeping your profile updated will help you get better results on your matches and the alerts. And you don't typically want to apply for awards that you're not eligible for. Now, the caveat being there that sometimes you might not be sure, or you think, I'm mostly eligible except for X or Y. When in doubt, I do encourage you to reach out to the scholarship admin. Most listings on Scholarships Canada will have a contact info, an email in most cases, sometimes a phone number. It's not a bad idea to reach out to these admins and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, and I'm interested in award X because Y and Z. Quick question for you about ABC. Not only will that help you determine whether you should or shouldn't apply to a given award, but some scholarship admins and some university college admission admins as well have what they call demonstrated interest. And so demonstrated interest is essentially, it shows that you are somebody that is known. You, as the student, have demonstrated your interest in the award or the program or whatever. When it comes to close decisions, it's down to candidate A or candidate B. And candidate A reached out, asked a few good questions, follows us on social. Candidate B, we never heard of before. Some admins may lean towards candidate A because they have demonstrated interest. They've built up a little bit of a rapport. They're not just a name, they are a person. Now, it's not to say this will always work in your favor or anything, but when in doubt, it's not a bad idea to reach out. That's all I'm saying. Okay, boilerplate documents. So students often ask, how do I apply, or how do I save time applying, really? And this is one of the best ways to do it. Boilerplate documents. So there's 3 document types that you're going to need. Your resume, sometimes called a CV, your references, and your personal statement. So for your resume, we only need 1 page. It doesn't need to be super extensive, and especially for most students, you probably don't have a super extensive resume. So be short and sweet and to the point. having read a lot of resumes for scholarships and otherwise, it's not often that we do a very close read. It's not like reading a novel, right? It's not Moby Dick out here. We're kind of scanning and skimming. So make your resume easy to scan and skim. There's lots of advice on Scholarships Canada about resume building. Lots of advice all over the web, really. You'll be able to find advice out there. Focus on your skills, your experiences. Okay. References. 2 is a good number. You may want 3. You'll typically want 1 academic and 1 personal. By that, I mean, you typically want somebody who has known you in a somewhat professional capacity for about a year or more, who, yeah, knows you, but isn't, your mom or dad, your best friend. We're talking people like coach, volunteer supervisor, principal at school, your boss at your part-time job, et cetera, et cetera. They can speak to your personality. They just shouldn't be somebody who is like a family member or a friend. Yeah, and getting a couple of general references for your files and hanging on to them that, to whom it may concern, we recommend so-and-so because blah, blah, blah. That can be super helpful because you'll want these references again and again when you're applying for scholarships and maybe even for schools. Personal statement. You want to do about 500 words. I'll cover this in the next slide, but I want to highlight that you should customize these documents for each award that you apply to. Now, the idea of a boilerplate is that you have all this stuff pretty much ready to go, fire away. You just want to make sure that you're editing it where needed. So we'll talk about the statement in a moment, but in general, you want to be responsive to the prompt, right? If they want 3 references, make sure you send 3. If they want the references to be very specific for that scholarship, don't send something generic. Make sure you're reading the instructions, that you're customizing these documents where needed. But remember that once you have them in your pocket, you're in a much better position than trying to build them in real time. So the personal statement, 4 parts in 500 words, thereabouts. Who you are, number 1. This is your background, your history, your elevator pitch, right? Who the heck are you? Who are you? Number 2 is your goals. What do you want to achieve? Where are you headed? Why are you in post-secondary? Why this program? Why are you applying for this award? 3rd part, what the award means to you. How would receiving the scholarship impact you? Obviously, free money, quote unquote, is great. We all want that. But if you can connect it a little bit to your field of study, your career choice, maybe your volunteer experience, something that happened to you in the past that shaped who you are, right? Tragic backstory kind of stuff. And then finally, what the award means to your community. So not only will winning the award help you save some cash, etc., it will also have effects on your community, ideally. Does this mean that maybe your little sister will consider a career in cybersecurity now that she sees her big sister, succeeding, or what, right? How will the people around you benefit from your receiving the scholarship? That's the main thing. Again, we're all often thinking about others. We're trying to cast ourselves out into the world to be productive, engaged members of the society, right? And so how will you receiving money help the people around you? If you can tie all this together into a compelling narrative bow that showcases some of your unique character, your personality, and connects these dots into a narrative, you're going to be in pretty good shape. That's easier said than done. So a bit more advice. If you have an AI tool write it for you, know that I am disappointed, but know even more so that you must show your work to others before you submit it. Whether it's written by ChatGPT or not, don't publish something. You're essentially, when you apply for a award, you're publishing in a way. Make sure mom and dad, your teacher, maybe a reference, somebody, couple people, look it over, give you some feedback. It can be embarrassing to share our work, but it will make your work better if somebody gives you feedback. So highly recommend that. Again, this is your basic personal statement in about 500 words. Who are you? What are your goals? What would receiving the award mean to you? And how would receiving the award positively impact your community? If you can tie all that together, tell us a little bit about what makes you you. You've got a solid personal statement. Okay, moving right along. Instagram, what's that? Scholarships Canada. You can follow us probably via that QR code. School Finder. School Finder, I mentioned at the top. School Finder is our sister website to Scholarships Canada. It's for Canadian students who are interested in Canadian schools or schools abroad. If you are an international student who is interested in a Canadian school, we recommend studyincanada.com, which is the red version of School Finder. I don't have a slide for it though. There's an event section on both School Finder and Study in Canada. We are actually at an event right now of sorts, so I won't belabor it, but I will mention that we do have another Study and Go Abroad fair coming up in March. I'll cover that again in a second. But I want to hit up some scholarship FAQs. So these are questions that students and parents and counselors ask us again and again. So when do I apply? Well, in most cases, you need to have got an offer of admission, or at the very least, have applied for an actual post-secondary program, so a seat in a college or university. Most scholarships assume that you are, if not enrolled, certainly applying, and some will actually want to see proof of enrollment to qualify you as an applicant. So if you're in grade 11, we'll talk about that in a second. There are some awards that are open to grade 11s. Horatio Alger springs to mind, we covered earlier. But most awards are more for the grade 12, first year uni kind of time. Okay, other awards for people in the trades? Yeah, absolutely. And that's partly why we covered the Jake White's Memorial Scholarship, just to demo that fact. In short, trades awards are not as common. It goes back to the way the apprenticeship structure is financed in this country. It's very different from the, traditional university and college setup. So at least as far as Scholarships Canada goes, we advocate looking for awards for people in tech. Construction is a big sort of keyword. Apprentice is another big keyword. Trades. How many awards can I apply to and receive? I love this question because it speaks to ambition. I love the idea that folks are getting so many scholarships that they are, oh, woe is me, how many can I receive? Well, good news is you can get as many as you like, really. Apply for and receive as many awards as possible. Now, some admins may forbid you from getting more than one award from them. So, they're not going to give you award A and award B in some cases. But different organizations, you can get as many as you like. So yeah, always good to apply. What are the highest value scholarships? So I did mention Canada has relatively few full ride awards. Some of the biggest ones in the country are the Loran scholarships, which I believe just closed. The TD scholarships for community leaders and the Schulich Leader scholarships. Now Schulich is super cool because they have the leader scholarships, which are highly, highly competitive. But what they've done recently is they've added the Schulich Builder scholarships. They're, still competitive, certainly, but there are a lot available. I think there's like 40 awards each year or so. And each award is worth like 10 grand a month, or a year, excuse me, 10 grand a year. And the Builder Awards, Schulich Builder Scholarships, are for people in the trades. So if you're interested in apprenticeship or Red Seal, you want to work with your hands, you might be eligible for a Schulich Builder Scholarship. And they are got to be the biggest, skilled trades scholarship in the country. Otherwise, yeah, Loran, TD, Schulich, excuse me, these are top of the line. So if you're, one of those students who is the valedictorian, student council president kind of people, you might be eligible for some of these. But that's not to say you shouldn't apply even if you're not. Can I defer a scholarship if I need to? This one's a little bit more in the weeds. Deferring basically means that you have been accepted as the winner, for example, but you're not going to school because grandma got sick, whatever, you can't go. You're going to go next year. So you defer your receipt. I think this won't really affect too many people. Short answer is when in doubt, reach out because it really depends on the admin. Scholarships for international students. So lots of international students want to come to Canada, and who can blame them? There are awards for international students, but they are less numerous and probably more competitive, in short. The reason being that international student tuition is quite a bit higher than Canadian tuition, essentially because it is a subsidy in a way. Schools that are typically underfunded try to make up some of that funding with international student tuition, and thus providing scholarships to cut down that tuition is not necessarily in their interest. Now, obviously, there are awards for people in deep financial need or people who are incredible candidates who might not otherwise have the opportunity. So most universities, almost all, will offer some amount of financial aid to international students. The federal government has stuff at the master's level, especially if you're coming for research and that kind of thing. But on the flip side, it's going to be a lot more challenging to get a scholarship for like a 2-year business degree, for example. That's not to say they don't exist, but they're typically, less numerous and more focused on grades. There's less of a focus on the leadership, community service, extracurricular, volunteer kind of stuff. Okay, next steps. Depending on where you are, this is probably what you want to do. If you're in grade 11, it's time to build your resume. You will want to think about volunteering, which means meaning, not raw number of hours. Lots of times students will come up to me and say, hey, I did 100 hours of volunteer. Is it enough to get a scholarship? Or, hey, I did 200 hours. Is 200 hours enough? Well, yes and no. Most admins are not necessarily looking for just a flat figure. Maybe they're out there, but I have not met them. Typically, what we are looking for is how your volunteer experience impacted you, what lessons did you learn, and of course, critically, say it with me, how did it impact your community? How did your volunteer experience improve the lives of the people around you? Otherwise, you're looking to develop your leadership skills, your community service, and of course, those all important grades. Cool. If you're in grade 11 or 12, excuse me, you are looking at application season. It's pretty much closing now. So you're thinking about entrance awards, you're looking for renewable awards, anything that's open to a first year, really. And if you're in college or university already, if you haven't already met with your financial aid office, remarkably few students actually do this, go into the financial aid office and sit down for half an hour with the person who works there and just say, what are my options? They will know some stuff that you probably do not know, even stuff that maybe I do not know. So I would advocate that for sure. Otherwise, get involved with clubs, associations. A lot of departments and faculties might have departmental awards. So you might get the English award for the English department or whatever. Okay, quick plug for Study and Go Abroad before we move on to Q&A. We are hosting fairs in person in 3 cities, Toronto on March 2, Mississauga on March 4, and Vancouver on March 9. Mississauga in particular is quite special because that day, from about 10 to 2-ish, we're hosting a guidance counselor networking day where we're having a keynote speech, some panels, and some guidance counselor networking type stuff to meet and greet and swap war stories and best practices. So if you're a guidance counselor, do join us in Mississauga if you can on March 4. And if you're a student in any of these cities, visit studyandgoabroad.com and we'd love to have you there. T-shirt time. This is where I normally do my T-shirt canon and pop quiz, but T-shirt will not go through the screen. So I'm afraid T-shirt time is over as quickly as it began. So I want to thank you before we take some Q&A. Best of luck in your scholarship search, of course, and enjoy your night. We do hope to see you at Study and Go Abroad in early March. Otherwise, Q&A, our sites are scholarshipscanada.com and schoolfinder.com, and you can find us on Insta at ScholarshipsCanada. Whew. Now I will take a moment to look at the chat and see if we can answer any questions in our last few minutes. So if you don't want to stick around for Q&A, thanks a ton for your time this evening and have a great night. Otherwise, let's see what we got in the chat. Okay. Is it okay to apply for a scholarship with a reference letter my teacher wrote in November? Would they want a more excuse me. Do they want a more recent letter? In short, November is probably fine. It's within the last calendar year. The last even 2 years is probably in most cases fine. Just be sure that the teacher, whomever is still there, right? They haven't retired or whatever. Yeah, I would say anything in the last year or two is going to be fine. And like I say, an award does, or excuse me, a reference letter doesn't need to necessarily be addressed to the specific scholarship admin you're applying to, as long as it's a sort of general, hey, how you doing? I'm so-and-so. I recommend blah, blah, blah. Okay. Recently found a deadline on Scholarships Canada, different from the university website. Yeah, great. Not really a question, but great comment. We do our best, but it is a moving target. As you might assume, there are tens of thousands of awards just at Canadian schools, let alone all the others that we try to index. So Scholarships Canada gives you a sense of what's out there. Your school's website is the best source for that school, obviously. So when in doubt, let Scholarships Canada help you filter, and then you can go directly to the source to get the real details. Okay. Is there anywhere we can see these slides again? Yeah, I'm going to share the recording tomorrow, and I think I can share the deck as well. You can have the whole thing. Okay. What happens if you apply for a lot of scholarships and forget what ones you did? How can you confirm it's legit? Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, I mean, if you're applying to so many scholarships that you're forgetting them, I do know some students will use like a spreadsheet and actually track, I applied for X and Y on date Z, and, I reached out on A, B, and C, and blah, blah, blah. So you could track it that way. When you're trying to determine if a scholarship is legit and they're calling you up out of the blue saying you've won, just be skeptical, I think, is a good tactic in general. It's always good to be skeptical. Ask them to confirm details that they couldn't have otherwise. So, if you used a particular phrase in your personal statement, you could ask them to read it back to you or that kind of thing. And if they cannot or will not, you can continue to be skeptical. Yeah, good question. How about some others? Some deadlines in October, but students in grade 12 are just applying for post-secondary at this time. Do you not need to prove you've been accepted to a program to apply for scholarships? Sort of, yes and no. Some awards will just essentially want Scouts honor, yes, I am applying for college in the coming year, and that might be all they care to see. They may get to the point where you're on the short list, right? You're one of 3, and they just want to confirm now, see your letter of admission to confirm. So it really does kind of depend. Most awards do expect that you're going to post-secondary, but you don't necessarily need to have been accepted in all cases right away. Sarah asked, the website that offers scholarships for Muslims. Yeah, it's called the Max Scholars, MAX, is the Muslim Awards of Excellence. maxscholars.org, I think it is. They just opened today. Will a copy be sent? Stephen Wright, absolutely. Great. Okay, well, that brings me to the top of the hour, the bottom of the hour. I've blabbed at you for about an hour now, and I want to thank you for your time. Like I say, we will share the recording and the slide deck around tomorrow. But for the time being, really do salute you for taking the time out tonight. Thanks for your time and attention, and I hope you have a great time. Oh, and we've got Zachariah here. You got your hand up. I think I can unmute you, and you can go ahead. So allow Mike. Zachariah, I think you can go ahead. All right, Zachariah, you should have mic privileges, but otherwise you can use the Q&A. Oh, the form was on the survey. No good. Okay, good to know. Sarah, thank you. I will pass that on to my colleague who set that up and ensure that it's working again or removed. Yeah, so thanks for flagging that. It really does take a village to keep this thing humming. So we will take a look and see if we can get that fixed up for tomorrow morning. And otherwise, I'm for a break. Have a great evening, everybody. Really appreciate your time. Thanks again.